Thank you. In the few minutes that I have with you this morning, I would like to sketch for you what I believe to be the ideal profile of the next president of the United States. Many conservatives think that we should look for a candidate who fits the profile of Ronald Reagan. I believe we need to look beyond Ronald Reagan, go back to the founding fathers who gave us the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I believe our next president needs to fit the profile of the founding fathers, sharing their values and their political convictions. Now, this means a number of things. First, it means that the next president of the United States needs to be a man, I'm speaking generically here, needs to be a man of sincere, authentic, genuine Christian faith. There were 55 framers of the Constitution. We know as a matter of historical record that 52 of them took a solemn oath before Almighty God, an oath of affirmation in a historic, conservative, orthodox statement of Christian faith. It is no exaggeration to say that Christian statesmen created the United States of America. Now, 81% of the American people believe that we are on the wrong track. The other 19 are either lying or not paying attention. But we are on the wrong track because we have rejected and abandoned the moral and political foundation that was laid for us by the founders. I submit to you, if Christian statesmen created the United States of America, Christian statesmen can reclaim the United States of America. John Jay, who was the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, said, "It is the duty, privilege, and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." Those words were true when they were first spoken, and they are still true today. Now, secondly, we need a president who flatly, unambiguously rejects the morally and scientifically bankrupt theory of evolution. That's right. Why? Why? Because the founders believed in a creator with a capital C. They founded this nation on a profoundly religious concept that there is a creator and that creator is the source of every one of our unalienable rights. Now, no matter what you think of the mythical separation between church and state, it is not possible for there ever in the United States of America to be a separation between God and government. Because God is the source of every single right which government has a sacred duty to protect. Now, I submit to you that not a single one of our unalienable rights will be safe in the hands of a president who believes that we evolved from slime and we are the descendants of apes and baboons. Now, if you doubt me, look at the nation-states in the 20th century which rejected the creator God of the Judeo-Christian tradition: Nazi Germany, Stalinist Russia, Communist China. The one thing all of these secular states share in common is dead bodies. Yes. So we need a president who understands that the purpose of government is not to give rights or to grant rights, but to secure, protect, and guarantee those rights that have already been given to us by God. Now, this is not a religious test for public office. This is a political test for public office. It is a test of whether someone who wants to be our president shares the political convictions of the founding fathers. Now, thirdly, we need a president who believes in the same creator in whom the founders believed. The founders believed in the creator who is revealed in the pages of the Old and New Testaments. Now, our Muslim friends also believe in a creator God. But it's important that our next president understand that Christians and Muslims do not worship the same God. Now, if you doubt me, ask one of your Muslim friends, does the God you worship have a son? He will tell you that that is blasphemy. And as we heard from Jay Sekulow, there is a man who is under a sentence of death right now in Iran for committing the Islamic crime of believing that God has a son. But the founders believed in a God who has a son. They believed so profoundly in this Son of God that they dated the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution from the year of his birth and referred to him as our Lord. Now, in the Quran, the holy book of Islam, which Muslims believe was dictated word for word by God himself, by Allah himself, the God who has no son, in 109 verses, calls for his followers to commit violence against Jews and Christians. Just last week, September 30th, the deputy rector at Al-Azhar University, this is the most prestigious institution in Sunni Islam, this is the university from which President Obama delivered his 2009 speech to the Muslim world. He said this, the deputy rector at Al-Azhar University 1 week ago, I say to all my brothers and sisters, jihad has become an individual duty incumbent upon each and every one of us. And he referred to critics of Islam as, quote, the offspring of pigs and apes. I believe it's important that we have a president who understands that Islam is not a religion of peace, but a religion of war and violence and death. Now, there was a study that was published this summer that revealed that 81% of all of the mosques in the United States distribute literature that promotes violent jihad. This means that every single mosque in America is a potential recruiting or training cell for Islamic terror. We need a president who understands that the greatest long-range threat to our security and liberty is not radical Islam, but Islam itself. This is not Islamophobia, this is Islamo-realism. I believe our next president needs to understand that the more devout a Muslim becomes, the more likely he is to act on one of those 109 verses. That means the more devout a Muslim becomes, the more of a threat he becomes to our national security. We saw this 2 weeks ago. The FBI arrested a Muslim man, a United States citizen, who wanted to blow up the Capitol building and the Pentagon, killing innocent men, women, and children, because in his words, we Americans are, quote, enemies of Allah. Now, of course, there are many moderate Muslims. Most Muslims in America have no intention of acting out on any one of those 109 commands. But we must understand that while there may be moderate Muslims, there is no such thing as moderate Islam. Now, if you look at the Muslim nations around the world, it becomes clear that Sharia law is flatly contradictory to every value and freedom we cherish in the West. Under Sharia law, there is no freedom of religion, there is no freedom of conscience, there is no freedom of speech, there is no freedom of the press, there is no freedom of association, there are no equal rights for women. Now, what this means is at a minimum, we need a president who will use the resources at his disposal to resist, reject, and prevent the implementation of Sharia law anywhere, at any place, under any circumstances in the United States. Now, fourth, we need a president who sincerely believes in the God-given, unalienable right to life and who believes that that right begins at the moment of conception. This means a president who would not even think of appointing to the Supreme Court a judge who does not believe that Roe v. Wade was not only unconstitutional, but profoundly immoral. A president who believes that no judge is qualified to sit on traffic court, let alone on the Supreme Court, if he does not understand that the primary purpose of law and government is to protect innocent human beings from violence at every stage of life. Now, this issue of Supreme Court judges is critical because next month, voters in Mississippi will have an opportunity to amend the state constitution to define personhood as beginning at the moment of conception. Now, this may very well lead to a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade at the Supreme Court level. We need a Supreme Court in place who will choose life when that day comes. Now, we need a president who also understands and believes that the right to liberty is an unalienable God-given right and who will fight to protect it whenever it is under assault. This means, I believe, we need a president who understands that just as Islam represents the greatest long-range threat to our liberty, so the homosexual agenda represents the greatest immediate threat to every freedom and right that is enshrined in the First Amendment. It's a particular threat to religious liberty. For instance, Catholic charities have been forced out of the adoption business in one state after another because they believe that a child deserves to be raised by a mother and a father. Saw a middle school student in Texas just 2 weeks ago suspended for 2 days for sharing in a private conversation with another student his Christian conviction that homosexuality is wrong. Student clubs are being kicked off of one college campus after another because they hold fast to a biblical view of sexuality. Christian students are being tossed out of one graduate counseling program after another because they will not endorse the normalcy of homosexual behavior. We saw a Christian photographer in New Mexico fined $6,700 for politely declining to photograph a lesbian commitment ceremony, even though lesbian relationships have no legal status in the state of New Mexico. We've seen bed and breakfast owners in one state after another hauled into court because they believe that on their own private property, sexual intimacy ought to be reserved for a man and woman in marriage. We're already hearing stories about how faith-driven chaplains, service members, and officers, even generals, are being urged to leave the United States military if they cannot endorse homosexual behavior. So we need a president who understands that every advance of the homosexual agenda comes at the expense of religious liberty. We need a president who understands that we must choose as a nation between homosexuality and liberty because we cannot have both. A president who understands that we must choose between homosexuality and liberty and who will choose liberty every time. Now, we also need a president who understands the importance of the institution of marriage to our nation's political and economic health. A president who understands that marriage is an institution created, established, ordained, and defined by God as the union of one man and one woman, and what God has defined, man must not redefine. There's a British anthropologist by the name of J.D. Unwin. He studied 80 civilizations in world history. He discovered that every single civilization that practiced and honored monogamy was stable, prosperous, and successful. And yet every single civilization which rejected monogamy soon began to deteriorate, to decline, and wound up on the ash heap of world history. So we need a president who understands that protecting the institution of marriage is not just about morality, it's not just about children, it is about the strength, stability, prosperity, and survival of the United States. Now, this means we need a president who will endorse a federal marriage amendment. Now, don't fall for the lie that this is somehow inconsistent with states' rights. You cannot amend the federal Constitution without getting voters in 38 states to agree with you. You cannot get any more states' rights than that. Now, we also need a president who will vigorously defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court, and I believe we need a president who, on his first day in office as Commander-in-Chief, will revoke permission to military chaplains to perform same-sex marriages on military installations. I believe we need a president who will work vigorously to reinstate the ban on open homosexual behavior in the United States military. 67% of our frontline troops last year told the Pentagon that homosexuality in the military will compromise recruitment, retention, and readiness. We need a commander-in-chief who will work to reinstate the ban on homosexuality, not just as a matter of morality, but because our national security depends on it. Now, in fact, I believe that we need a president who will treat homosexual behavior not as a political cause at all, but as a threat to public health. The FDA will not allow a male to donate blood if he has had sex with another male even one single solitary time since 1977. They cannot play Russian roulette with the nation's health. The Centers for Disease Control, not the research arms, by the way, of FRC or AFA, has determined that of all of the males who have ever been diagnosed with HIV/AIDS in the history of the epidemic, 90% of them contracted it either through having sex with other males, 60%, injection drug use, 22%, or both, another 8%. Now, what this means is that homosexual behavior represents the same threat to human health that injection drug use does. I believe we need a president who understands that neither homosexual behavior nor injection drug use represent lifestyles that any responsible government ought to normalize, legitimize, legalize, protect, sanction, or subsidize. Now, fifth, we need a president who believes that the right to private property is as sacred a right as the right to life and liberty. A president who understands that the involuntary redistribution of wealth is profoundly immoral, and it does not make it right when government does it under color of law. When government uses its coercive power to transfer wealth from one citizen to another, that is not compassion, it is not welfare, it is legalized plunder. Now, liberalism is predicated on a violation of 2 of God's 10 commandments. As Walter Williams observed, God said, "Thou shalt not steal." He did not say, "Thou shalt not steal," unless you can get a majority vote in Congress. Liberalism is also a violation of the 10th commandment, which says, "Thou shalt not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor." And yet liberalism, and we see this in the Occupy Wall Street protest, liberalism is driven by this angry, bitter, resentful, acquisitive greed for the wealth of productive Americans. Now, I submit to you that no political platform that is predicated on a violation of 20% of God's law can possibly be right, can possibly work, or can possibly be good for America. I believe this means we need a president who will work to get the federal government out of the welfare business altogether as soon as humanly possible. James Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, said that I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted to Congress of expending the money of their constituents on objects of benevolence. So I believe we need a president who understands that the command of Jesus to care for the poor was not addressed to government, it was addressed to us. So we need a president who believes that the responsibility of caring for the poor should be returned to families, neighborhoods, communities, churches, and private charities where it belongs. A president who will not insult the American people by telling us that we do not have enough compassion and generosity to take care of the truly needy among us through the strictly voluntary redistribution of wealth. Now, we also need a president who is determined to balance our federal budget. Our current president says government must live within its means. We need a president who says the same thing but actually means it. Now, we do not even need a balanced budget amendment. I suggest to you that all we need is a president with the steel, spine, and nerve to veto the next increase in the debt ceiling. Now, realize if we had not raised the debt ceiling on August 2nd, we would have had a balanced budget on August 3rd. So we need a president who says to Congress, if you are going to load our great-grandchildren down with an intolerable and immoral load of debt for which they did not vote and to which they did not consent, you are going to have to do it over my veto. Now last, and I want to be sure that we understand, we are not in the pro-family movement anti-government. We are not anti-government because government is God's institution to execute justice and provide for national defense. We are not anti-government. We are anti-big government. We are anti-bloated government. And in particular, we are anti-unconstitutional government. Now, finally, I believe we need a president who understands the importance and the power of public prayer and the public acknowledgement of God. Benjamin Franklin, who was the least religious of the founders, reminded the Constitutional Convention, if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise, and I would add, be sustained without his aid? He reminded the founders, unless the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. We need a president who agrees with the wisdom of Benjamin Franklin. Now, this means at a minimum, we need a president who will participate personally in the National Day of Prayer, who is unafraid to pray before the American people, and who will not omit the Creator when he recites the Declaration of Independence. Now, by God's mercy, we have not been hit by a Muslim attack since 9/11. I suggest in part we have Major League Baseball to thank. You remember that immediately after 9/11, Major League Baseball converted the seventh inning stretch from the singing of Take Me Out to the Ball Game to the singing of God Bless America. Now, God Bless America is not just a song, it is a prayer. When we sing that, we are inviting God to bless America, to stand beside her, and to guide her through the night with a light from above. So for one brief shining moment every night, Major League Baseball has converted our stadiums into cathedrals in which tens of thousands of ordinary Americans lift their hearts and voices as one and ask God to watch over and protect the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that those prayers have been heard and they have been answered. Now, may God grant us a statesman in 2012 in whose heart the sacred fire of liberty burns as intensely and as brightly as it burned in the hearts of the founders. And may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.